I am a firm believer in servicing and repairing parts rather than just buying new, as I'm sure a lot of people are. It's better for your bank account and it's better for the environment. So in this video, I am going to service and overhaul this 20-year-old rear derailleur to keep it out of the scrap pile and keep it working for another 20 years. So what is it with this rear derailleur that we can actually take apart, clean and service? Well, we can get the pulley wheels off because, well, they're sounding pretty rough and worn out. We can take the cage apart, we can take the cage off of the main body, and then we can clean this main pivot point here and re-grease that. We can do the same for the top pivot point here. We can take the barrel adjuster off and grease that. Same for the limit screws and the little B adjuster limit, which is tucked on the back here. Essentially, what I'm going to be doing with this derailleur is giving everything a thorough and deep clean, taking off the parts which we can take off, clean those out as well, get all the old grease and grime out of there, and re-grease everything that needs to have grease on it. That way, it's going to be good for another 20 years worth of use. So, what are the parts and things that we're going to need in order to do this? Well, we're going to need some isopropyl alcohol, some degreaser. We're also going to need a selection of small brushes to clean into all of the little gaps and pivot points. We're going to need some screwdrivers so we can take some of the pieces apart. We're going to need some hex keys, again for the same reason. We're also going to need a small little bit of oil and some slightly thicker grease. Also, to help do the job, we're going to need a microfiber cloth, and to keep my hands neat and tidy, some gloves. Boom. So first thing I'm going to do is put some gloves on to keep my hands nice and clean, and then I'm going to move on to cleaning all of the external parts of the derailleur. That way, when I start to remove all of the other little bits and gain access to other areas, I haven't got to worry about cleaning all of the external parts off again and just making life a little bit tougher. So to do that, I'm going to spray all of the outside surface with some isopropyl alcohol or your degreaser, whichever you want, and then use these small little brushes to get into all of the little gaps and areas which are difficult to reach, and then I can clean it out. At that stage, then I'm going to take my small little hex wrench and start to take the pulley bolts out, so that I've then got access to get those out of the way, and then start to look at this cage pivot point, which is going to be my first port of call. Now this derailleur does appear to be in quite good condition, but that's not really the point, because what we want to do is make sure it's in tip-top condition, so it's going to be no trouble and ready to go for lots more happy miles. Right, let's do it. All those little gaps. Once you've got into a lot of these little gaps and sprayed plenty of cleaner or isopropyl alcohol over everything, you can just take your microfiber cloth and give everything a good wipe over. That way, we're hopefully not having to fight with all the external dirt and grime at the same time as getting some of those delicate internal areas, some of the initial bit done and dusted. So what we can do is take our small little hex wrench. This one is 3mm. Yeah. Well, that one was already loose, that's good. So, with this off, we can sit all of this lot to the side and out of the way. You can already see this, look at that, it's all pretty much fallen to pieces. The lower pulley wheel actually looks like it has a fair bit of wear on it. It's supposed to have a little bit of play, but it's going to be interesting to see what that bushing actually looks like inside, because it might be a case that that is already quite worn. So we can clean all of this out and then start to look. Being a slightly older derailleur, this one doesn't have separate bearings inside. What this has got is a little metal bushing which runs on an inner race inside here. So that's how it sits, just like that. And that's the bit that rotates round rather than having a separate bearing. So. Clean these little bits up and then we can set them to the side. I think what I might actually do is, seeing on how these clean up and how the rest of the derailleur goes, when I'm restoring my dream bike, I might just buy some new pulley wheels, because for something that's pretty low cost, might as well. Yeah. Soon, anyway. You can see just how much old grease and grime builds up in all these hard to reach areas. And this is just years worth of use. What is interesting is where that lower pulley wheel was obviously got a bit worn and has got some extra play in it. Here, it's allowed the chain to rub away at this cage slightly. That's why we've got a little bit of that discoloration. So also probably another indicator as to why that lower pulley wheel is best to be replaced. That's better. Okay, so that's the lower part of the cage, cleaned and prepped. We've got the pulley wheels all cleaned, they're ready to go back in. I could probably get a little bit more grime out of those if I try and be particularly thorough, which I'll do that in just a second. But when we start to look at this main cage and the main body area of the derailleur, the next thing I think I want to try and remove is this, which is the other half of the pulley wheel cage. And it's under a spring tension because this is what helps keep your chain tight when you're going over bumps and stuff like that. But this needs to have some really nice, clean, thick grease into it so that it's not going to get washed out when you're washing and cleaning all of your bike. It also, because it's moving so much, is an area where there is a high wear rate. So if dirt gets in, it's going to literally rip through the grease and the little plastic bushing that's in there. So what we're going to do is take this apart and clean it all off. So we've got a 5mm hex bolt on the back end, which should be quite tight. As I said, because this is under a spring tension, you need to be aware that as you're undoing it, it can quickly like spin round and ping round. So just hold a bit of that tension with your thumb, like I've got here. Then that way, as we undo it, and this tiny little notch here moves away from the main body, that's the bit that's stopping it spinning round. So once it gets past that, it's going to be down to us to hold it in place, which is going to be any second now.
When you take the pulley wheel cage away from the main body of the derailleur, it's important to take note of not only the way that the spring tension is applied, but also where the small little locating tabs sit, so that when it comes to putting it back together, well, it all makes far more sense.
So here I can let a lot of that tension off, just like that. Now our spring tension is gone, and it's just a case of removing that bolt all the rest of the way out, and we can get access to see what on earth is going on inside here. Let's see what's going on. Oh, look at that. That is gross. Horrid, horrid, horrid. Well, at least we're getting it apart and cleaning it all now. Okay, so we can clean all that out with our degreaser and isopropyl alcohol. This bit, we need to get this plastic bushing out of the way. That looks disgusting. So, clean this all up. Even with the dirt and grease removed from this, if you look super closely here, you can see the metal is all tarnished and stained, which is an indicator of whether some corrosion has got in there. So what we can do is get a small little bit of emery paper or any sort of mildly abrasive paper and just rub that surface over so we've got a nice clean finish on there. That way, when it goes back into the main body of the derailleur, it's going to be nice and fresh with no corrosion and to get it run silky smooth. So yeah, this is a small piece of abrasive paper. It's pretty fine, so this is a 600. You can just take it, put it over this pivot point. Just clean that up. Doesn't take much, just enough to shine it up a little bit. You can always see it's starting to look a lot better. Okay, look at that, we can start to see some silver bits on that now. That's much more like we want to see. Right, let's do some more cleaning. So this is the little plastic bushing, I guess, that sits behind that cage pivot point. And this is what helps not only double up as stopping side-to-side movement where you don't want it, it also helps keep a lot of the dirt and grime out. There's so much build-up of it on here. It's important to get it all off or we're going to undo a lot of our hard work. With this little selection of parts over here clean and ready to go, they just need some fresh grease in them when we assemble everything back together. I can now move to spend a bit more time on the main body of the derailleur. So what I'm going to do is remove any of the other bits which we can just take off. So things like this barrel adjuster, which can just be unwound all the way off the back. And then set that here because it needs to be cleaned. I can take a small screwdriver, start to take these limit screws out. Judging by how worn they are, it looks like they've had plenty of adjustments made over their lifetime. Now there really is, I guess you could say, no actual need to take these apart, but it's quite nice to go through the process of taking everything apart and cleaning it and greasing it, putting it back together, really for like peace of mind as well, rather than just the fact that there was a problem with something in the first place. Prevention is always better than cure, is what I say. Now this main pivot point here is something that I've not actually taken apart before, so it is under some spring tension. You can see when I move it there. The main bolt which runs through the body of it is held on with this little clip here. So what I'm going to do is try to rotate that clip round. So with that turned, you can see I've got this little gap here I can drop a screwdriver into and carefully lever that up whilst holding the main body still in place. It's tricky. There we go. So that's off. So in theory now, this section here needs to be held in place and gradually have the tension removed from it. I think it might ping, there we go. So as this section lifts off the little main body, you can see it's allowed to then rotate round further, similar to what the cage section did. So slide that all off, let's say. And look at that. More horrid grime and brown gunk inside there. It looks to be like a pretty similar setup to the main pulley cage. It's got slots for the ends of the spring to go into. See this little end here? That needs to slot in place in the body of the derailleur, and the same, put that up there, for this little edge, which needs to slot in this hole here. So when we clean everything up, that's got to slot back in there to make sure it has the tension on in the correct place. This is the area where the limit screws are, and you can see there's such a build of gunk because I very much doubt they've ever even been removed. So let's get a little brush, some alcohol right in there, clean these all up. Look at that. So where we're at the moment, everything that can be removed off of the main derailleur body has been removed and it has been cleaned and it's all sat to one side. And if you look at the state of this bit of cloth and the microfiber that I've got here, look at the amount of dirt and grime and rusty brown stains there are which highlights how much gunk and dirt there was in some of those key pivot areas. So what I'm going to do now is get all these dirty bits out of the way, start with somewhere clean that I can work from, and then I can start to apply some grease onto those pivot points and put everything back together. Now, of course, putting it back together is simply the reversal of taking it apart. But what you need to be mindful of is these sprung pivot points here, that these little tabs are located in the correct position. And when you add some preload to it, you do it the correct way round, which means you should have paid good attention when you took it apart. But it is pretty simple and straightforward if you're methodical with it. Now you'll notice here, I've got this small little pot of Shimano premium grease. You can use whatever grease or sort of oil like this which you want to use. I chose to use this because as part of my sort of bike build and restoration, I thought it'd be nice to use the original factory fit grease. So that's what we're going to do. Let's put this stuff back together and away we go. So the derailleur is starting to take shape to what it should resemble now. Most of the parts which need to go back on are back on, and they've got some nice fresh grease on there. So what I'm going to do is just wipe off any excess grease that has sort of worked its way out of the gaps or just where I've been assembling it in general. And then I can start to put the pulley wheels back on. Now I am going to use these original pulley wheels for now. They are a little bit worn, but that's something that I'm going to replace over time. But by cleaning them and putting some fresh grease in, you can keep them going for a little bit longer. Also, if you really wanted to go to full nerd level restoration of this, you could also get some very fine emery paper and start to polish the main body of this derailleur. But this one is actually in pretty good condition. Sure, it's got a few little scuffs here and there, but it's almost like that's adding to the character of it. So the next stage of the process, I'm going to put some grease into the bushings on the pulley wheels, then get this thing back together. So this is our derailleur back together, looking exactly how it looked at the start, which is a good thing. Apart from now, we've got fresh grease in everywhere that needs to have grease, and we've got all that old build-up of dirt and grime removed. Now you'll notice that I haven't actually used this thin oil anywhere in the rebuild yet, and that is because I didn't really feel it needed it. You see, the main pivots in the parallelogram body are actually really silky smooth still, but if you're finding that your derailleur is a bit like dry, old and stiff to move, you can get a thin oil such as this and then apply it down into those couple of pivot points and give it, say, 24 hours to soak in and work its way in before you then wipe all of the main body of the derailleur off so it's clean and ready to go. All that is left for this is to be refitted back onto the bike, at which point I'm going to have to make some adjustments to the setup of it because I've had those limit screws out and the B tension screw has been out and adjusted. So when I do that, set the limit screws, I can then reattach the gear cable and adjust the indexing, and then that should be good to go for plenty more years to come. Anyway, that is this derailleur ready to go to refit back on my bike. In the coming weeks, there's a chance that I might replace these little pulley wheels for some fresh ones, but otherwise, this thing's good to go, and hopefully it's helped you out restoring some parts of your own bike. Anyway, if you have enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments section down below if restoring parts like this is something that you do, or you just end up throwing them away and buying new stuff. Right, don't forget, also subscribe to GCN Tech. I'm out of here to go fit this back on my bike. See you later.